I want to be doing something else.
You talked about core values and how that's so important. I just wanted to ask about religion.
And yes, you get lots of rejections, but you also, with the right people, you get acceptances.
So what was it exactly about working in that environment that made you think actually coaching for me?
Welcome back to the More Than Medics podcast. Today we have Dr. Seema Pattni, a GP and careers coach dedicated to empowering physicians to achieve career fulfilment and balance. As a GP, Seema has developed and led services in homeless health inclusion, social prescribing and family planning. Today we explore career coaching, how medics can find fulfilment through realising their core values, and the ways we can improve healthcare service delivery. We really enjoyed this episode, so we hope you enjoy it too.
Thank you so much, Seema, for joining the podcast. So just before we start, can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your journey?
Yeah, of course. So it's a pleasure to be here, Martin and Yasmin. And so a bit about me. My name's Dr. Seema Pattni. I graduated from Imperial, I think I told you last time, about 2 decades ago, which makes me feel quite ancient. And since then, I guess I've been pretty busy. I went through foundation training and into medicine, core medical, and a bit of hospital medicine. Took some time out as well along the way. So I went traveling. I did the diploma in tropical medicine, and then I went into general practice, and I specialized while I was training in sexual health. And that was amazing. Then I tried working in New Zealand for a while, which was really, really insightful. I worked in a Maori clinic, so it was working with a lot of underserved and underreached communities, which I thought was a really special place to be working. So I enjoyed my time there. And then I came back to London and was working on setting up services for homeless communities. And that was, in a way, what led me to where I am now. It's one of the things that I'm proudest of in my medical career. But because I was recruiting people and having a team that I was responsible for, I ended up doing a lot of their mentorship and their coaching just naturally, things like one-to-ones and appraisals. And it became quite clear that it was something that was fulfilling, that I enjoyed, and that I was good at as well. And so that kind of led me into the space that I'm in now, which is coaching doctors. And mainly the focus is on navigating careers so that every doctor I work with finishes feeling refreshed, firstly, and a lot more balanced and happy about where they're taking their career, and they're aligning their specialties and all of their options with what matters to them most, so their values. And that way, what I'm seeing is doctors are feeling a lot more sustainable in terms of they're finding their careers more sustainable, because it is hard. We know that medicine is hard from the minute you start at the age of 18, for as long as you continue in it. And it's not all about, you know, what else can I do instead of medicine? Sometimes it's how do I complement it, or how do I diversify? And sometimes it is how do I develop something on the side? But of course, there are doctors who say, actually, although my calling is really strong to help people, it's not necessarily in the clinical space anymore, and I want to be doing something else. So that's how I've kind of ended up here, and that's how I met you guys, and I'm really enjoying it. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. I'm also, probably should have said this first, I'm also a mum, and that also keeps me very, very busy.
What an exciting journey. And thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
So I wanted to ask, you mentioned it was your work in helping with the services for the homeless people, homeless population, that kind of encouraged you to then go into coaching. So what was it exactly about working in that environment that made you think actually coaching is for me?
Well, I suppose there's a few answers, few strands to that, because I was working in that setting as a GP. And so, as a GP, during your consultations, you do a lot of health coaching, and a lot of life coaching probably becomes part of that general consultation. And even more so with people who've been quite traditionally underserved and underreached, they're often quite ignored. And so, there's a lot more of that kind of work that goes into working with patients specifically, but also I was responsible for a bigger team. And it wasn't the first time that I was responsible for a team, but it was a time where I was doing one-to-ones with them, and I was doing their appraisals, and I was supervising them. And you can take quite a tick boxy view to doing that. I'm sure we've all had really good supervisors and not so good ones, right? And you can tell when someone's just kind of going through the motions, but you can also tell when someone's invested in you. And I was invested in all of them. And it was about, how do I ask them the right questions to get them to realize what their motivations are? And doing that with them, I just really enjoyed it. And so it kind of expanded from there. And I started doing it informally. And then I decided to, just the timing of other things in my life, I just decided to set it up myself as a business, and focus on that. And that's my mainstay now, actually.
And how have you set it up as a business?
Um, well, I actually did it after my son was born. So I was up all night anyway, because the first 3 months you don't get any sleep because they've not adapted to day and night yet. And that was the time where I was like, I'll try and set up a website. So I did get some help with it. I got some advice, but I used, one of the website tools out there, and I just launched a homepage and a few of the other pages and started populating it, and putting myself out there. And then after a while, I started networking and going to events and speaking to people. And yes, you get lots of rejections, but you also, with the right people, you get acceptances. And so I was asked to write for places like Pulse and the MDU. I was asked to speak at conferences, places like Best Practice, and that's been, again, kind of a way of seeing who's out there and who needs help. And that's how I just built my business. It was a lot of hard work, and it wasn't easy, but it was definitely worth it. And I had a lot of ownership and autonomy over it. And I think that was something that if I'm honest, I did miss that in traditional paths in medicine. For me, that was missing. Yeah.
And in your coaching sessions, how do you go about it to help the individuals reach their full potential, which you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. So everyone's different, and that's the first thing that you have to appreciate. And everyone comes with a different goal when they start coaching. And it's about, firstly, understanding yourself better. So actually the first session is quite a deep dive, and it gets a little bit feely, and sometimes there's laughter, sometimes there's tears, because what we're going into is what really makes that person happy and what makes them sad. And sometimes when you're going into those questions, the answers, are quite reflective and they're quite deep, and people get realizations about, actually, this is XYZ has never really made me happy, and I've just been putting up with it, or I've ignored this part of my life when there should be more of it, and that's why I'm feeling so drained in what I'm doing. And once you've established that and articulated what your values are, so I kind of call it the values finding session is the first one. And once you've done that and you've articulated it, it's actually really helpful as a guide, because your values are almost like your personal GPS system. They inform a lot of almost everything of what you do, how you interact with others, what drives you, your purpose. And once you know that, it becomes a lot clearer as to what specialties are going to work for you and why, and what's going to drain you and what's going to energize you. So once you've kind of got that in your pocket, you don't lose that information, and it's a very good kind of steer for where you want to go. And then the sessions after that tend to be, okay, now we know this, what options are we looking at realistically for you? We need to be financially safe, emotionally safe. We need to be practical and look at what your day-to-day obligations are, and how do we bring all of that together and develop a career pathway that's going to work for you? And are we looking at diversifying? Are we looking at going for more senior roles, or are we actually looking at taking a step back? And then we plan that out, we prioritize and strategize, and then after about 4 months of some initially weekly sessions, and then they space out, people feel much better, and they've got a much more fulfilling career. For example, I was working with a psychiatrist who was amazing, and she was so smart and so talented, but she just didn't see it, and her confidence was really quite low. And a lot of that was to do with some of the really bad working conditions that are just normalized in the NHS. And a lot of it was to do with not having the right mentors or the right guides, and just not enjoying what she was doing. And she hasn't left medicine. She's actually found a really nice niche within medicine, within an eating disorder department, and she's working with specifically young women, which is something she's always been passionate about. So she's kind of found that, and she was wanting to develop as a medical writer, but it was very clear from the beginning that she had this big creative in her. And so she's now gone back to a novel that was unfinished and finished it and is presenting it to publishers. So sometimes when you start the coaching, you have an idea in mind, but actually when you dig deeper, you realize there's something really big there that you should actually fulfill and follow, and it can all fit in.
Yeah.
And it's really wonderful to see that at the end with people's journeys.
That's lovely to hear. And I wanted to ask, actually, with that example, for example, you mentioned, you said that a lot of her, for example, unfulfillment or lack of confidence at the time came from those experiences she had in the NHS. So I guess systemic barriers, maybe you could call them. So with the people that you coach, how much of the challenges that you see come from systemic barriers, and how much of it comes from the individual mindset?
Yeah, that's a really great question, actually. I would say it's both, and it's in varying proportions depending on the person. So for some of us, working unsocial hours, unpaid hours, without breaks, some of us, it doesn't necessarily phase us, and that's okay. And some of us, it really does phase us, and that's also okay, because at the end of the day, we're different and we're human. So there will be people that the systemic barriers, like the pay, the conditions, some of the bigger issues like the bullying that can go on, a lot of that does play a big role, but it's incremental and it's over time. And what I've found is a lot of people have become quite institutionalized and quite normalized, and it's just like, oh, but that's what that doctor's like, and you'll learn loads from them anyway, or just get through this last year and then you won't have to put up with that. And it almost becomes like it's just part of the territory. And I think we're now approaching a corner where people are going, no, it shouldn't be part of the territory. So yes, the systemic barriers, unfortunately, they do affect everyone, but in different proportions. And I think our own barriers, again, that develops often when we're quite young. The same kind of time, around the age of 5, when we've kind of crystallizing our values. Our childhood experiences, our educational experiences, and even, when we're starting uni, there's big influences there that affect your confidence, that affect what you believe you can do. And of course, for lots of people, depending on your protected characteristics, things like depending on what gender you are, what ethnicity you're from, society is giving you a message as well about what you can achieve, what you should achieve. And whether we like it or not, that embeds in our consciousness. And it might sit in the subconscious, it might be more active, but it's there. And coaching is about unpacking a lot of that and working through it. And it is hard work to go through as a person. You have to be in the right space, you have to be ready, and you have to want to go through some of that kind of soul searching to overcome it. But it's worth it. It's worth that effort.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you maybe a question that you haven't got all too much. It's you talked about core values and how that's so important. I just wanted to ask about religion and how that affects someone's core values and how that
Yeah.
modulates their careers. So I feel like religion is something we try to separate from our
Yeah,
careers, but
yeah.
for a big,
Well,
yeah, yeah.
I've actually found it to be a really, really big thing, Martin, in quite a few of my clients. Religion and spirituality is definitely something that helps to form your values because it's a key influencer, again, usually from quite a young age. And so a lot of people connect their calling in life with their religious beliefs, what they believe, you know, God wants for them or what they believe, their purpose in life is. So I do find people with quite strong connections between religion and between their work as a clinician and beyond that, actually. And it is usually then coming down to a basic value of altruism, compassion, care, love. And it's really beautiful to see how strong that is in people. And I don't think it's like you say, I think sometimes people find it's almost kind of too controversial sometimes. But actually there's a lot of my clients have that in them. And I found it really insightful and I found it really nice as well because I coach people from all backgrounds and they often bring that into the conversation, how Christianity feeds in, how Islam feeds in, how Hinduism feeds in. And it's really nice to see that. And there's commonality actually between a lot of the faiths and the messages that they're trying to instill in us.
And what do you think is the hardest part about career coaching? Because, for example, you mentioned about the emotional side to it. A lot of the clients may reveal a lot of past experiences or thoughts that are quite deep within them. So
Yeah.
I'm imagining that's probably one of the challenges or hardest parts. Is that true? And what other kind of challenges can you face as a career coach?
Do you mean for me as the person coaching or for the person who's having the coaching?
For you.
For me, I think the hardest part is actually at the beginning is seeing how unhappy people are. And as someone who is neutral and an observer and experienced, it's really obvious to me to see how smart they are and how much potential they are. And it's sad to see sometimes how broken they are. That's what is, I sometimes at the end of a session, I'm just like, it's really sad. Like, why? Why are they like this? And how have we let this happen to doctors as well? And how have we let it become like just a thing that we all just go through when we're training, that we put up with not feeling great, we put up with burnout because it's just the way it is, And I think actually one day what I'd really love to see is what we see in other industries which have a lot of vicarious trauma, a lot of responsibility. We see therapists having their own therapists and their own supervisory sessions. And I don't mean like clinical or educational supervision, I mean actual therapeutic supervision. Clinical psychologists have the same. They have, I've got friends and colleagues who work as educational psychologists in peds and in other areas, and they all have at least a monthly session where it's just them airing everything they've been through. Now, I know in medicine that's getting better. I know that, university probably has put it more in place, but sometimes, you're not necessarily matched with your supervisors. You're not necessarily, it depends on the supervisor, doesn't it? It's very variable, and sometimes it's just part of their job plan, and that's why it's being done. Sometimes they're super, super passionate about it, and it shouldn't be a lottery for us as to what experience we end up with. So I think it can be done better, and I think, what I'd love to see is that it's just that's what's normalized, is having therapy and coaching as part of your training, as part of your education from the day you start medical school, because why not? We see growth through it, we see less burnout, so it's a no-brainer because everyone's healthier mentally, physically, spiritually, and you're going to retain your workforce more. It's just obviously incredibly resource intense to have it, but I think if you were to play the long game, that would be a really good option.
And do you think that coaching should be taught to medical students during med school as well? So not only have a coach for yourself as you go through your career, but actually teaching the skills of how do you coach people so then they have the skill sets themselves.
Yeah, I think why not? I think coaching can come very naturally, and I think some of the best coaches actually have never had formal training. Some of the most famous coaches in the world haven't had formal training. So for a lot of us, it can come intuitively, it can come naturally. But I think there's nothing, I would have no objection. In fact, I would encourage everyone to be taught the principles of it, because not only does it help you as a person, you can help your friends informally, you can help those around you, you can also help your patients through those coaching tools. And, again, it's something that you could then explore further on. And I think it would make you, because we all go through kind of the hierarchy of medicine at some point, and we all reach different platforms where we're responsible for others. So if you've learnt those coaching tools, it'll make you a better mentor or a better supervisor when it's your turn to be there. So I think, yeah, absolutely, it should be a lot more embedded.
Mm.
And what's one piece of advice you would give to someone if they wanted to explore coaching as a career?
I think find someone who resonates with you. You need someone who has the experiences, who has a way of communicating that matches you, that works with you. There is a whole wealth of really good coaches out there, and the way you choose someone is by speaking to them initially. So a lot of coaches will give you like an introductory call, and that's the time when you ask all the questions about what is it that they do in the sessions, what is it that you're going to be doing, and what kind of ethos are you following. So some people are a bit more directive, some people completely stand back, and it's about finding a style that's going to work for you. And I think I'm going to cheat here. The second piece of advice would be you need to be in a good space for it. You need to have the headspace, the time, and the energy. And it is often a financial investment. But the biggest thing to remember about that is that that's an investment in yourself, and it's an investment in your future. So yes, you might spend X amount of money on a 6 session course, for example, but what you're going to get out of that will, you're going to earn that back straight away. You can't put monetary value on feeling better, but you will also earn that money back because you won't be wasting as much time kind of navigating and trying to understand things, and you'll probably be in a career and accessing opportunities much quicker. So I think that would be my advice.
I was also wondering, about this question relates, I guess, to sort of the mindset of medics in general, but I feel like, medicine's seen as sort of a hard science, and it's, it's sort of cut and dry what you need to do. Obviously, there's a psychosocial element.
Yeah.
And for you as a coach, how have medics been how receptive have they been to sort of your services? Have they seen it? So I mean, I feel like some medics may see it as sort of slightly wishy-washy, or or attribute certain words like that to it, saying that this is something maybe I could do myself, or maybe I just sort of need to think it through myself. Why do I need someone else to sort of hold my hand through it? I
Yeah.
think there'd be a lot of skepticism potentially. Have you found that?
Yeah, sometimes there is a lot of skepticism. I think it depends at what stage you are in your career. I think a lot of people, once they reach, 5 to 8 to 10 years in the career, they have a much better understanding of what the system is like and how it's working for them or how it's not working for them. And they've realized that, yes, over that time, they have tried to coach themselves, they have tried to figure it out themselves, and actually it's not getting them to where they want to be quick enough or fast enough or easily enough, and they're hitting a lot of stumbling blocks. And you develop a self-awareness with that some of it's probably me and some of it is probably the system. Like you said, how much of it is me, how much of it is systemic barriers, and having coaching will actually help you to uncover that. And having coaching is a way of challenging yourself. You've got someone neutral who you are airing your thoughts out to, and who's there to push you and challenge you and say, why do you believe that though? And sometimes you won't do that for yourself, and sometimes even your closest friends and family, you won't either you won't take them seriously, or you'll take it as too deep a criticism, or they won't say it to you because they love you and they want to protect you. And it's not that I don't want to protect my clients, but it's I'm there to really push them and challenge them and get them out of their status quo in thinking. So yes, sometimes you do get that, but I think once you've invested in it and once you've experienced it and once you've maybe done a little bit of medicine, all of that comes together, and actually more and more doctors are embracing it now, and I think it's becoming a lot more mainstream.
Mhm. Okay, and I wanted to now kind of talk about your experience in developing services. So can you just tell us more about what projects you did when you came back into London working on that?
Yeah, so when I first came back, I was in South London and I was working as a GP. And at that time, PCNs, primary care networks, and GP federations were really kind of in their element, and they were developing kind of borough-wide services, and lots of funding was coming from the CCG, which is now the ICB, and lots of funding was coming from local authorities to kind of make the care a bit more universal and more accessible for different populations. So the first one that I worked on was to do with social prescribing and making that a part of general practice, because a huge percentage of the work that we do, as Martin said, is psychosocial. And at that time, GPs were definitely overloaded with that kind of work, and it was impacting on the running of clinics, it was impacting on how much we could fit in and how well we could do it. So it was an initiative where we recruited and trained people to be good social prescribers, and they would receive referrals from GPs across the borough. And they would work over a course of time, it was usually 6 to 8 weeks, with that individual and look at how can we get the, okay, the doctor thinks you should have more fitness and exercise. How are we going to get that going for you? You've said to the doctor that you're not feeling great in yourself and you're lonely, so how can we connect you up with the community? And I'm sure there's loads of doctors who'd love to be doing that, but unfortunately we don't have the time, and we don't often know what services are out there. We might have like a link somewhere on a PDF with all the resources, but in 10 minutes, even 20, how are you going to do it? And how are you going to keep seeing that person? So that was a really nice initiative. And then COVID hit, so we had to move everything online, which was a different challenge. And then we had to kind of move into COVID response for a lot of these individuals who are on their own and struggling. So that was a really interesting project. It's still going. And then I ended up moving for personal reasons to a different part of London. And because of that experience in setting up a service, I felt like, yeah, I can do this again. And who do I really want to work with now that I've exampled that? And it was through the social prescribing that I kind of realized one of the communities that is the most ignored, but actually needs some of the biggest help, is the homeless population or people experiencing homelessness. And that comes in so many forms, right? It's not just rough sleeping. It's people who are sofa surfing. It's people who are at risk of being evicted. And, unfortunately, society, and that includes medics, has a very particular view and stereotype of why they're in that situation or why they're there. And I don't think that's fair. The reasons that they're there are often, again, as I've mentioned before, due to childhood experiences. Those things aren't under their control. And it all builds into how they've ended up in life, their coping mechanisms, and the things that they have to put up with, and why they develop certain coping mechanisms. And actually, they've been so mistreated by a lot of services. And again, those services just aren't necessarily, I'm not defending them, but they're also just not geared up to be able to support. The NHS is so stretched. And so there's so many issues here. And it wasn't about assigning blame. It was about, let's just do this better. So I recruited some GPs, I recruited a paramedic, again, a social prescriber and a care navigator. We did training together, and they were an incredible team. They were so passionate, and they all really, the good thing was, and it comes again back to values, they had the same values about why they were doing the work they were doing. And that was cohesive for us. That was the glue. And we had the same vision that actually, let's keep it simple. We just want to improve healthcare for this population. We can't change the world, but we can change this tiny pocket of how we're doing it. And we had a service that went out, which was called Outreach. And that was mainly the paramedic, and he would kind of do the rounds really of areas that we knew people were staying. And we would just very gently kind of start approaching. And there's lots of kind of teaching and evidence and principles out there about how to approach things, and it's not necessarily about getting it's similar for all consultations. It's not about necessarily the doctor's agenda. It's about listening and understanding what is priority. And actually, if their priority is something else, it's helping them, as long as it's safe, it's helping them achieve that. And then saying, and what about this? And again, because it was COVID, it was a time where people were coming off the streets and being housed in hotels. And initially, that was a great idea, but it wasn't without its own problems that arose later. But for a while, people were at least in places that we could access quite easily. And so it made the care much easier. And we registered more people. So a lot of people in the homeless population aren't even registered with a GP because they don't have a fixed abode, and it complicates things even though it shouldn't. And legally, everyone has a right to register whether you have an address or not. But it does, it's hard for GPs to know how to handle it. But we kind of made that a bit more streamlined. We had a massive MDT, multidisciplinary team, which went beyond our side of things. And we were connecting with social workers, with other outreach workers, with the council. And we just all came together to work on this. And it was a really good time, I think, for us to be making change and making things better. And the main thing was that, you know, we were getting people good healthcare and things were getting better. And that's why you do it, right? Because even if we helped a lot more than one person, but even just helping that one person get their prescriptions and get through their chest infection rather than having complications and going in and out of A&E, it was like, no, you can come to this GP. And we had a specific clinic that was accommodating for them, and we had people with lived experience in the team as well, and that was really helpful because they would say, well, that's never going to work, why are you doing that? And it's, sometimes I wouldn't necessarily think of that. So it was a really nice collaboration, and I think that's when I left that's the feeling I left with, is that this is going to sustain itself now. And it's got itself going. So I think I really like setting stuff up and the challenge of that and bringing it together. And then once it's kind of ready to float, it floats.
I really value your initiative there, and I think it really just highlights how you can make small steps, small changes, but it can make a big impact. And especially in this community where there's a lot of stigma surrounding it, there's a lot of misconceptions surrounding it. It's so important to support this community. I remember in my medical school, in third year, we were doing our GP placement, and a few of us had the opportunity to basically go to a GP practice in Westminster, I believe.
And that's a big hub.
Yes, and it's only focused on providing care for those who are homeless. And I chose to do that day. And I remember, honestly, that was probably the best day of my GP placement, just because it made you really, it just highlighted the issues that they face, the discrimination that they face. And actually, at the end of the day, they're human. And majority of people, for example, especially in London, I notice, because I'm from the Northwest, where I think it's a little bit more friendlier.
It is.
A lot of people just ignore them as if they're not human, as if they're kind of rubbish, they're just on the side, they don't even exist. And actually, I remember speaking to some of them who are homeless, and I asked them, what can we do as a society just to make you feel a bit more valued? And all they said was just say hello. Even kind of acknowledging them, giving them that eye contact, waving
Yeah.
at them, saying, how are you doing? And I
It's
remember,
acknowledgement, isn't it?
Yeah, I
Recognition.
can say that.
It's that feeling of being invisible. It
yes,
hurts.
yeah,
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
say firsthand, Yasmin and I did the same BSc and we were walking out of the tube station and there was a homeless chap there. And I'm going to be brutally honest, I was going to walk past, but then Yasmin actually stopped,
Aw.
said hi, said how he's doing. And it was really nice. It just made me realize, I'm an awful person. No, it made
You're
me
not an
realize
awful
that,
person.
I need to, yeah, these people are obviously humans and it's so easy to just walk past and,
Yeah, I think it's part of when you're not in that situation, how do you cope with the sheer number? Because the numbers are increasing, and it's more, although individually they feel invisible, to us, we're seeing it a lot more. And so it's perhaps the shock factor has gone away a little bit, but also I think sometimes as humans we have to start kind of shelving things further back in order to just kind of survive with all the horrible things that can be going on around us on a bigger scale that we feel we have no control over. But as you say, it's about the small steps. It's not about, we don't have to, especially as medics, we want to fix a lot and problem solve right to the end, and then you're done. But sometimes it's about accepting, well, I'm not going to solve this whole problem, but I can just be kind.
yeah,
And sometimes that's just it. You can be kind. And I think there's also a lot of stigma, as you say, but there's also a lot of kind of misunderstanding about the services and how to access them. And we think it's really easy to go and find a hostel, or we think it's really easy to get help. But as we said, everyone has systemic barriers, and that population has a huge amount, and everyone has their own individual limiting barriers, and people who are homeless are no different. They have personal barriers and systemic barriers, and they have no one supporting them to
yeah,
get through them overall. Yes, there are charities there, but actually the way things are commissioned means that there are restrictions in the way that people can access help as well. And, there's good things and bad things about those restrictions. And I don't want to go too much into them, but they are there. So it's not as easy as, oh, well, just get yourself down to the hostel and you'll be fine. Why should I give you money? And, there is no right or wrong answer really, but it's about just seeing that person as a person sometimes.
and I think what I'm hearing even more is that, as you said, as medics, we like to problem solve, but what's actually truly important is just listening and being there.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I think there's a difference between hearing and listening as well. We might
Yeah.
hear stuff, but listening is actually truly taking that time, being active, being present in the moment, and understanding what they're going through, because we
Yeah.
can't fix a problem if we don't actually understand it from their perspective. And then that's when you mentioned
Yeah.
the lived experience and how vital that is to developing these services. And I
Yeah.
kind of wish medical school taught us that more, because this community is not the only community that is facing kind of barriers. There's so many other
Yeah.
underserved
Yes.
communities,
Yeah.
and we don't really get taught about their challenges
No.
they're facing. We don't, they don't invite those people from those communities in so we can actually speak to them and listen to them, rather than
Yeah.
just hearing it through the news or hearing it from some other person, etc. So I think that's what
Yeah,
I'm
you're
hearing even
right.
more.
yeah,
You're right.
I do
Spot
like
on.
as well, just like as a GP, how you can sort of help the whole population within your within your area. I feel
Yeah,
like in secondary care, well, obviously you have, and you're working with lots of different people in secondary care as well, but it's a substrata of the population that you're trying to help. But you're literally providing care for the whole population. I like that the aspect of with your projects as well, how you've been able to work with paramedics, to the social services,
Yes.
all these
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
people to I can see how that would be quite rewarding, quite enjoyable, and how you're sort of
Yeah, it was
working.
really cool. It was really cool because, you also understand how healthcare looks to other people who work in it, not just doctors, and you understand how it looks to services outside of medicine. So you understand, like, oh, they didn't know this XYZ about getting an appointment, even though they're working in social care or in hostels for homeless people. They didn't know that that's an option. They didn't understand why there's certain protocols in A&E, and actually when we all came together, it was just sometimes just explaining stuff, and vice versa, you know. Well, no, that's not how it works to get a referral for an X-ray. This is what you have to do. Oh, okay, well then this is what we'll do in future. And it was just, simplifying a lot of the unknown and explaining that. But we also learned a lot as well about, no, that's not how you can get accommodation. That's not how you can get a social worker, and this is how it all works. And by coming together, it used to be every Wednesday morning, and by coming together just for that hour, we were able to discuss people. We were able to have, really informative discussions about how to collaborate, and it took away a lot of time that's being wasted phoning this person, referring here and doing that, when actually you can just solve it in 30 seconds. So it was, I think, collaborative working across medicine, between primary and secondary care. It's an age-old thing that we need to communicate more, because otherwise we end up resenting, and it's not healthy for anyone, and it just causes problems.
And I wanted to ask, with creating services, obviously they will be a lot more personal to the area, to the population that you're serving. But how can we kind of share best practice? Because I can imagine there are other areas in the UK that are facing the same issues, that are facing the same underserved communities. So how can we kind of bring more, don't want to say standardization, but collaboration
of what's best
areas
and what works, and because you don't want to just reinvent the wheel and do what they've done in Birmingham when it didn't actually work in Birmingham, or actually maybe it would work here in London because the population is slightly different. So definitely for social prescribing and for people working with homeless populations, there's a lot of evidence based medicine, and there's a lot of information sharing, and it's amazing. There are regular conferences, there are bigger networks where people meet. We used to invite each other from different boroughs and different experts into our MGTs to give advice as well. We used to hold training. So that definitely was something that was really good about both of those sort of streams, really, is the information sharing, because again, everyone had a basic value and a vision that they wanted to help these people. And again, that's why it all comes down to what matters to you and what drives you, because when you are working with other people who have that in common with you, you end up going forward instead of just stalling. Now, of course, there's always commissioning issues, there's always funding challenges that you have to face. But again, that's how we all learn from each other, is, well, what did you put in your bid, and who did you get the funding from, and how did you use it? So talking to each other in conferences and having these bigger networks is incredibly important.
I wanted to ask as well, is in your sort of experience as a life coach or a coach for medics, you've obviously talked with many medics with different sort of specialities. Obviously, as early career medics and med students, we're interested in where we want to go, and we don't want to make the wrong choice. From your experience, what sorts of people or what sort of core values are sort of maybe more compatible with certain specialties? I was wondering what your thoughts or your views are.
Yeah, I think so. That's a really, really good question, and it's a big answer, I think. So bear with me.
Yeah.
I think so. Firstly, there is, although we've talked about sort of saving time and saving kind of effort and stress in working out what you want to do, there is still some value in exploring. And sometimes you might think you want to do something, and until you've sampled it, because we don't always get to sample it, as you said, not everything is exposed to us in medical school or even F1, F2. So sometimes we do have, that's life, right? You have to take some time to explore, and you'll find that actually, no, this isn't the reality of it isn't what I thought it would be. And so in principle, we have collectively values like compassion, empathy, communication. Those are all things that are quite important to us as medics. Work ethic is often quite a big one as well. So in principle, medicine is a good fit, and you might find that some people have teamwork as a really strong ethic, and so they wouldn't necessarily want to be working as a locum or in a silo or in a room on their own.
Or
They
a
want to
GP?
be, yeah, or as a GP.
Yeah.
I mean, GPs do have teams, but largely you're in a room on your own, right? And you have periods of time where you meet with your team and discuss things. Whereas when you're in hospital medicine, you're part of a much bigger team and it's all interconnected. And so if that's your value, that might be something that, stands out to you more. Um, Autonomy can be quite a big value in medics, and that's quite hard to find wherever you go. But of course, when you reach consultancy or partnership, maybe that's going to be something that delivers you that autonomy, or actually, maybe it's about having your own independent practice at some point. Um, so I think there isn't necessarily like choosing the wrong thing. It's about reframing that as an exploration because no experience is wasted. I did hospital medicine. I tried different things before. I I initially wanted to do HIV medicine and sexual health. And then actually, I realized I can do that within general practice and I can do it with more continuity of care. And connection's really big to me. So, continuity of care is important. And that's why I followed it in the general practice pathway. Um, so, I think we all have slightly different values, although there are some commonalities there. And it is sometimes testing out, what works for you because it's not necessarily about having 100% kind of a values match, but it's about finding the balance that's right to you. Are you happy with just getting half of it met? Or do you want 80%? Or actually, are you just going to put up with 20% of it because you're just going to get on with things? And I think one thing that's important to mention, and I think it's something that there's a little bit of shame attached to in medics, and partly because we have the NHS, and it's about a lot of us have financial security as a really strong value, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with wanting to earn a good salary, but I feel like, and what I see is a lot of people don't want to say that. There are people who say, no, I want to get rich and I'm going to go and do this, this, and this as a medic. But there's a lot of people who don't want to voice it because it's almost like, well, then you're not a good doctor because you're in it for the wrong reasons. And it's like, no, you're a person who has responsibilities or knows you're going to have responsibilities, has to live in the world that we're in, which is capitalist, and this is how you do it. And so it's not necessarily that they're materialistic or anything, it's just they're realistic and they need to accept that. And I think we need to accept that more. And I think we need to be able to say, we deserve good salaries and good pay and fair pay as well. And so that's something that I think, don't ignore that when you're looking at your specialty. And I think when it comes to choosing a specialty, it is really important to know what energizes you and what drains you. And a bit of exploration is important for that, but then also having some of the guidance and the mentorship and the coaching can be really, really helpful.
I completely agree with your point, for example, regarding the financial security. So I think a lot of the time it is shamed upon, saying that you want to earn a bit more. People go, okay, well, why are you a doctor then? You should know that in this career field, you're not going to be earning as much at the beginning. Unless obviously as you go along, as you progress, you can. But I remember even having a conversation with one of the GPs and they were very open about their finances. They were like, if you want to ask me about how much I make, that's fine, ask me. And I think sometimes it's just kind of frowned upon asking, how much are you making? So
Yeah.
that's important because then you can understand, okay, what are they doing to reach that financial security?
Yeah.
And I do to maximize that.
Yeah, and you don't want it to turn into a blind spot because also, you can find that at some point in life you start realizing, well, again, because of your protected characteristics, gender, ethnicity, background, class, you're not getting the same as some of the people you are equally or more qualified than. And so this conversation about earning potential and fair pay needs to come earlier and it needs to be more open a lot earlier so that we're used to talking about it. It shouldn't be a secret what the partners are earning. It shouldn't be a secret what the male and the female GPs are earning. It affects so much. It doesn't just affect your salary and your paycheck or your take home or your pension. It affects your self-worth. And actually, how you value yourself and your self-worth is evidenced as a big risk factor for stress and burnout. So there are groups of people, like women, like people of color, who burn out faster. And a lot of it is to do with how we are perceived and therefore how we perceive ourselves. Money comes into that, what we're prepared to put up with comes into that, so many things. So I think it's important, like you say, I'm really glad that that GP invited that conversation with you, and there should be a lot more of that.
Mm. And I wanted to ask, how have your protected characteristics, so coming from a South Asian background, being a female, and I guess also being a mother, for example, how has that influenced your career as a coach and a GP?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think a lot of what I faced, I'm only realizing in retrospect, because when I was younger, and I don't know if you got told this, but especially my dad, and he always used to say, Seema, you're going to have to work twice as hard because that's the way it is. And I was like, no, I don't. I'm fine. What are you talking about? The world isn't like that anymore. And then, I went into the world and, I hate to say it, but it's one of the best pieces of advice that I've been given. And that comes with a really bittersweet feeling, doesn't it? Because, you know, it's sad that that's the reality, but I'm glad that he prepped me for it. I wish it wasn't that way, but my experience is that it has been like that. And so often I've, if I was to take general practice, for example, again, I'm sad to say that in practice meetings, I've made lots of suggestions, very active in those kind of how do we run the practice, and I'm often it was ignored or interrupted. And what was really frustrating was if what I said was paraphrased by another doctor who was maybe not Asian or not a woman, even if it was a few weeks later, it'd get onboarded. And I was like, but hello, I said that. Like, what's going on? And I don't believe anymore that it was the way that I was articulating it. And I don't believe that it was the timing. I do think that a lot of this is still in existence. And actually, it's not just my personal experience. It's not anecdotal from what I've been through or what the people that I coach have gone through. There's evidence out there. There was a comprehensive review published last year, 2024, and it was across about 71 studies over 43 years spanning 26 countries. And its conclusion was that actually women in healthcare work harder. Now, if we were to say that, that causes controversy. But they evidence that the work that women are given is of higher volume and higher complexity. And part of that is to do with, and this isn't just a stereotype, again, it's been evidenced, is differences in communication style. So receptionists will automatically allocate certain complexity to that doctor. And patients will select that doctor based on communication style. And of course, there's exceptions to the rule. And I'm not here to kind of dispute the quality of male doctors or doctors who aren't from XY ethnicity, but there is evidence there. And there's evidence there that shows that women do have it harder, and for working longer hours with more complexity and actually for less pay. And that's why the evidence again shows that women burn out faster and at higher rates. And a lot of it is preventable, right? But it takes time. You can't change society overnight. This stuff has been in the world for centuries. And the same with, ethnicity. And again, like I was saying before, if you're from an ethnic minority, whether you're from this country, born and trained here, or whether you've come and graduated from somewhere else, there are unique challenges. Not only are you contending with everything that medicine throws at you, but you're also contending with everything that society throws at you. And those biases, whether they're conscious or unconscious, they are there. So there's a whole wealth of evidence out there. It isn't, always just you. It's not necessarily something wrong with you. Of course, on individual levels, there's always times where we can do better. But I think what's really important to remember is that there are, again, systemic barriers in the world, and some of us have more than others.
And do you think the NHS is sustainable how it is at the moment? And what
I mean,
propose?
that's a hard question to answer, isn't it? Because it depends on how it's going to continue to be funded, and it depends on how much more goodwill is left in all of the NHS workforce, not just doctors. It is surviving on doctors and all staff working for free, doing unpaid hours, and it almost is exploitative of that goodwill, that value of compassion and altruism that a lot of us have. And you know, we've all taken an oath as well to not put patients at risk. So you don't just go, oh, it's the end of shift, I'm off, right? No one really does that. But it's unfair for the NHS to keep relying on that. And it's been doing it for years. And even when I, you know, was doing my work experience as a 17-year-old, I remember the doctor saying, oh, this is unsustainable. Now, like I said, that was a long time ago, but it's not getting better. It only seems to be going in one direction. And, you know, things like well-being of doctors is so undervalued. It feels like it's not a priority, despite all the lip service, and we have all these well-being initiatives, but well-being isn't expensive. It is things like having a staff room, and a lot of them are being taken away. Having a rest room, they're being taken away. Having just a hot drink, you know, I've seen so many people sending messages and sending me things saying, oh, look, this was a poster on my coffee machine. It's not here anymore. And it sounds ridiculous because it is. You know, why are we arguing over a little cup of coffee? But, you know, something as small as that can actually just really boost your day and your shift. And so it's small things like that that actually can build into workforce well-being. And there's a lot of work for the NHS to do, and it is overstretched in other ways as well. I mean, I focus a lot on doctors and how they're feeling, but there is also the allocation of funding and resources, health and social care, because what we're seeing a lot now is corridor care, isn't it? And that's because there isn't enough patient flow in the right direction, and that's because the broader services that are meant to be supporting our populations aren't well funded or staffed either. So it's a big crisis. It's not just the NHS. And I think, you know, it's a huge undertaking. So I've kind of I don't know the answer about whether it's sustainable or not, but I think it's going to be very difficult.
And I guess to put it on a more positive note, then, for the future generation of medics entering the NHS, what's one piece of advice you would give to them? So not only kind of, you mentioned, for example, understanding your values, but if you had to give one other piece of advice, what would you give?
I think that don't ever forget how much of a privilege it is to, oh, I'm going to get emotional. Don't ever forget how much of a privilege it is to have that connection with patients, because for however long you do it, you learn so much about people, about life, and it is incredibly humbling. The stories that people share with you when they are at their most vulnerable are incredible. And sometimes it's like a cheat code in life. It's like, okay, I know I won't do that now, or I'll take that on board actually, because it's obviously been so meaningful in that person's life. And it depends on what you like, but that meant so much to me, is understanding people. And I guess that's why I do coaching now, because it's understanding people. But it's a really beautiful side of medicine, and it's one of the biggest reasons why we do all do it, is to help people. And even though sometimes it feels like, you know, all this paperwork and all the bureaucracy and all the protocols just get in the way of you helping, you are still making a difference. You just might not see it because of the way, you know, that shifts are organized, teams are organized, you're rotating all the time, there isn't continuity. But sometimes doctors, you know, they just say a couple of things and it stays with that patient forever. And not many people can say that about their work. You know, I can still remember what medics have said to me when I was a patient, and I'm sure you can as well. And so you have a huge potential to change someone's life, and never forget that, even though it can get really hard.
It's a really nice point to remind ourselves of, because I think at med school, at least, it's drilled into us that you need to show empathy, and it's almost systematized that we have to show
Yes,
empathy, and
yeah,
it's
yeah.
empathy is not like that. So like on the ward, like in our clinical exams and our OSCEs, it's like there's marks for empathy, but like so you almost sort of put it on, even though innately we
Yeah,
do
you
have
don't
that
necessarily
empathy
meet.
normally.
Yeah,
So it's like
it's
with
hard, isn't it?
yeah,
Because it's kind of training you to be a certain type of
yeah,
empathy because they want to, again, standardize it and make sure everyone's got it. But sometimes then your natural
it's
humanness
suppressed.
doesn't come out.
Yeah,
And it's this tricky point of how do we make sure there's a basic kind of standard, but also allow people to be themselves.
yeah,
And again, you know, their creative selves, their compassionate selves, and their empathetic selves. And it's sometimes it's really hard to do that on a busy ward round, isn't it? Or in a busy clinic as a GP. But you do find ways of doing it. And sometimes and then I guess this is when we run late or we overrun, but sometimes it's about after the ward round you just go back to that person and you check in and make sure they're okay. And it's not just about having it towards patients, it's about having it towards yourself. Really important to be empathetic and compassionate towards yourselves, because we're just not, we're also trained out of that, I think, because we're told to be more resilient. And compassionate towards each other and checking in on each other and your teammates, you know, the students who are in your class, because, you know, it's tough at times for all of us, and we're all going through it. We don't need to go through it in silos and in
mm,
silence.
And I guess just to round things off, um, you've done so much within your work as a career coach, as someone who's helped with developing services, and as a GP. And if you had to say in one word what impact you'd like to leave on the medical profession, what would it be?
Hope.
I love that.
Yeah, hope, because it's always there, and it doesn't matter what stage you're at and what your experience is at the time or has been. Just keep the hope, because that will drive a lot for you.
amazing finishing words. Thank you so much, Seema.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Amazing. We'll end the podcast there.
Brilliant.